There's a certain kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. You know the feeling. You wake up after 8 hours, the physical debt is paid, yet you still feel heavy. Not in your muscles or your bones, but somewhere deeper. It's a weight that resides behind your eyes and at the edges of your spirit. It feels like your soul is carrying invisible luggage you can't put down. This isn't the glorious fatigue after a marathon or a hard day of meaningful labor. This is the fatigue of existing, the quiet, chronic weariness that leaves you functionally capable on the outside, but internally hollowed out. And when people ask, what's wrong? You can't point to anything specific. You can't blame one big catastrophe because it wasn't one big thing that broke you. It was 1,000 little things that quietly drained you over time, a constant, unacknowledged leakage of your vital energy. This is the fundamental difference between physical tiredness and emotional exhaustion. Physical fatigue is solved by rest. Emotional exhaustion is a signal that your life requires rest, or perhaps a fundamental change in direction. People who are tired of existing don't necessarily want to disappear. They just want the noise to stop. The noise of endless expectations, the noise of comparison, the noise of pretending to be okay when every single day feels like a performance you didn't audition for. Or worse, a performance you forgot the lines to. Psychologists have given this state a name. They call it emotional exhaustion, often the first and most critical stage of full-blown burnout. It's a point where the mind stops fighting, not out of weakness, but out of sheer depletion. Imagine a car running on fumes for years. It doesn't suddenly die from a catastrophic failure, it simply ceases to move. It happens when your emotional output has radically exceeded your emotional input for too long. When you keep giving energy to survive, to work, to maintain relationships, to hold space for others, but you receive very little back in return, or, crucially, you forget how to receive it. What makes this invisible burden so insidious is that it's not always visible. On the outside, you look perfectly functional. You're working, you're smiling, you're meeting deadlines, you're doing what needs to be done. You've become an expert at the surface level of life, but inside everything feels muted. Joy feels like a distant language you once knew how to speak but can't seem to remember anymore. Love, excitement, and passion are experienced not as vibrant colors but as a faint, almost irritating buzz. What's fascinating and what truly validates this feeling is that this isn't just a mental state, it's biological. The brain, under prolonged, unyielding stress, doesn't just get tired, it begins to rewire itself for chronic survival. It's a physiological response to a psychological threat. Your brain starts filtering all experiences through the lens of fatigue, anxiety, and threat assessment. The reward systems, the very mechanics that give life flavor, they slow down. Dopamine responses weaken. That spark that makes you look forward to the next day, that initial burst of motivation fades like a dimming light bulb. This creates a dangerous loop. You stop feeling pleasure, anhedonia, which drains motivation, which makes you feel more fatigued, which makes it harder to seek out joy. So when someone says, "I'm just tired," it's not laziness, it's not a moral failure. It's the mind, the organ that runs the entire operation saying, I have been carrying too much weight for too long, and I require a fundamental change in payload and direction. This is where psychology meets humanity, because behind every tired soul is a story not of failure, but of effort, intense, dedicated, often unrecognized effort. The people who are tired of existing are often the ones who've tried too hard to keep everything together. They are the peacemakers, the reliable helpers, the ones who always show up even when they had nothing left to give. They learned how to survive in chaos and crisis, but they never quite learned how to rest in peace. We live in a world that rewards productivity, not presence. You are praised for working overtime and pushing through, but rarely for taking a quiet day to think. You are celebrated for the movement, but rarely for the moment. And what happens? We internalize this. People learn to equate their worth with constant activity. And when they finally stop, when they truly pause, they feel overwhelming guilt, as if rest is a moral failure or a selfish act. This is the invisible chain that keeps people trapped in their quiet exhaustion. To understand this deep fatigue, we must look closer at the engine room, the autonomic nervous system. When you face an acute threat, a missed deadline, a difficult conversation, a sudden emergency, your sympathetic nervous system kicks in, the classic fight-or-flight response. This gives you the energy to tackle the problem. But when the stress never stops, when the threats are daily, low-grade emotional demands, your system gets stuck on high alert. This chronic state of low-grade emergency is what drives emotional exhaustion. It's not a moment of panic, it's a state of perpetual hypervigilance. And eventually, if you can neither fight nor flee the situation, the nervous system moves into the last resort, the freeze response. That's when you feel numb, disconnected, and apathetic. You might physically feel glued to the couch, unable to start a simple task. This isn't laziness, it's a biological shutdown meant to conserve the last remaining drops of your emotional fuel. This shutdown manifests as the painful truth of anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure. It's not about being sad, it's about emptiness. Imagine living in grayscale, where even the good things, the promotion, the beautiful sunset, the laughter of a friend, feel neutral. This is the brain in self-preservation mode. It stops reaching for joy and excitement because it has learned that the pursuit of joy is often followed by disappointment or further depletion. It learns, tragically, that it is safer to expect nothing than to risk being hurt or drained again. This is why people in this state often start pulling away. Not because they don't care about their friends, but because social energy becomes an unbearable expense. Even small talk, the performance of engagement, feels like lifting a mountain. They might cancel plans, stay silent in conversations, or spend more time alone. Their nervous system simply cannot handle one more emotional demand, one more piece of input it has to process, manage, and respond to. Isolation, tragically, feels like a necessary form of safety and self-protection. But here's the critical point that must be understood. These individuals are not giving up, they are trying to protect the last core of themselves. When the world becomes too loud, too demanding, and too fast, silence and isolation feel like the only shelter. It's like finding a small dark cave during a storm. And even though the silence can feel empty, at least it doesn't hurt. This fatigue is a cumulative debt built up over years of emotional suppression. Every "I'm fine" you said when you weren't. Every time you forced a smile instead of cried. Every time you stayed quiet to avoid conflict. Each of those moments added a grain of sand to the invisible luggage. And one day the bag is full. That's when the small signs start to appear. Music doesn't hit the same way. Laughter feels forced. Time feels slower. And you look around and wonder genuinely when your life stopped feeling like life and started feeling like a repetition.